And some folks may be voting back in district. There is a Super Tuesday today, so we may have a few members that are back home casting ballots. But thank you anyway. We're going to start today. I want to hear from Diane Naxie. Diane, if you will, come and address the committee. I think she's got an interesting concept that Diane, you can either the podium or you can sit. It's your choice. And Diane, if you will, tell us who you are, who you're with, and a little bit of the concept that y'all are behind.
Thank you. The reason I'm here is because I am not sure that the state of Georgia knows that a company that has provided over $2 billion of capital to small businesses since its inception is right here in this state. And we have been doing a lot of research in terms of how other states are trying to address this issue. And one of the templates that we're looking at is actually in North Carolina, where the state has decided to put together almost a consortium, which also happens to be called Capital Access Network, no relation, to try to get organizations together with institutions that have capital to provide through the business development centers, the technology centers, the universities, as well as the SCORE and SBA. So part of my message here is to say that you do have a corporation here in the state that is very well recognized in terms of its ability to provide capital to small businesses. We have been recognized in numerous ways, won several awards for the technology that we do have to provide this responsibly to small businesses, and that we do think that there is a way for us to try to work together to provide this capital to the small businesses of Georgia.
Dan, I was briefly reading some of the material that Representative Horn had given me. Y'all were sort of unique or different in a way in that you would buy into a future, the product that this business was producing. In other words, you would buy in the sales at a future discount. Maybe you want to elaborate on a little more.
Right. Basically, the reason that we're able to provide capital to small businesses is because we look at the small business differently than what traditional financial institutions do. I, having come from actually two major national banks, know that generally when someone looks at a small business, they're looking at tiered criteria. They're looking at something called a SIC code, their industry code. They're looking at the owner's credit score, for example, and if you do not meet certain cutoffs on any of those tiers, then you are declined. And right now, the declination rate that's being published among national institutions is somewhere in the 20% range. What we have found is through all of the literally billions of pieces of data that we have collected for 14 years is that those things are not predictive of a business's success. The entire a successful business owner is de facto going to destroy his or her FICO score because it is much more important for them to make sure that the business survives. They are going to use their credit cards in order to get their next set of inventory. They're going to max out whatever kind of access to capital they have on their personal credit. And as a result, their FICO score gets destroyed. That does not mean that they are not running a successful business which should not have access to credit. So basically, what we are doing is taking a model that actually looks at different components of the business. Primarily what we are looking at, in addition to about 75 other things, is what is going to be the sales of that business in the next year. And the access to data that we have that the banks do not have is that we can actually tap into what their daily sales are based upon what their credit card sales are that they take in their business. So every time a customer will swipe a credit card in a restaurant, for example, is that we will know what that sales rate is. So while the banks are actually trying to provide credit based upon a rear view mirror of what is that business's last year's tax returns, or what is it that they are finding out experientially about that business owner, what we're actually looking at is what are the daily sales. And so the reason that we're able to make this seamless and also decrease our risk is that we are actually able to work with the merchant processors as well as the banking community to every day take a small amount of those sales to take care of the obligation that the business owner has with us, as opposed to waiting for a monthly check. So a little bit every day is less risk than getting one monthly check. And we're also able to find out much more quickly if that business owner is having any kind of issues, because we're seeing what the daily sales are. As a result of those models, we have been able to provide working capital to small businesses at a default rate that's in the single digits, which is really unheard of in the financial institution arena. And the reason that we're able to actually try to provide this money to businesses that normally would not qualify for it is that we are looking at an asset that the banks do not qualify as an asset, which is the business's future credit card sales. And that actually is something that we're able to model off of to try to determine if I see Joe's Pizza Parlor in Kennesaw, I know what that should be doing in terms of sales compared to other kinds of businesses or other pizza parlors or other businesses that profile like a pizza parlor. And therefore, I know if Joe is running a good pizza parlor or not, and I'm able to provide him working capital off of what I believe the model says his future sales are going to be. And basically what I'm doing is I'm advancing him those sales now at a discount. Does that make sense? Okay.
Any questions or comments from committee? Representative Harden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming and telling us about this. Is your capital all basic? Is it private capital, or is the government fund involved also?
No, there's no government capital. We actually work off of private investors. In addition to, we have bank lines from Wells Fargo, Key Bank, Fifth Third, and Brown Brothers Harriman, which is a bank in New York. And those lines, it's surprising, is that we have pretty much defied gravity. Is that while everyone has been cutting back on their credit lines to businesses, over the past 4 years during this economic crisis is that we have actually been able to increase our credit lines. And so the reason why this actually is working with the banks is that they see that they have had to constrict. They're seeing that we're able to grow. And we are now actually working with banks to try to serve the people that they decline as almost a second look option.
I do. And do you do this more as a line of credit than a loan? Is that kind of how I understand you're operating? And you deal with a daily withdrawal, if you will? Mm-hmm.
Right now, the model that we have can work under any kind of product. We've done leases, we've done loans, we've done something called a merchant cash advance. We're working on trying to figure out how to put this product on a credit card, for example. So the model and the system that we have can be placed on any kind of a credit facility. And we work with partners who provide this under a white label. What we haven't done is, at this point, figure out how we work with the government and agencies to try to extend the reach of this and the knowledge of this into the small business community, which is why I'm here. All
right, and just one more question, if you don't mind. You said single-digit rates, and of course, most everybody's in single-digit rates now because of the low interest rates. Do those vary on a business on a day-to-day basis, or is that a set rate that you use?
Actually, the single-digit rate that I was referencing was what our default rates are, which is demonstrative of the fact that we are pretty good at trying to figure out whether a business is worthy of getting capital or not. Okay. The actual cost of the money that the business will pay depends on all different kinds of factors relative to that business, as well as the partners that we work with, like banks, for example, very often will say that they do not want us to charge more than a certain amount. And so basically it's just a trade-off, is that we can price at any kind of an interest rate or a cost of the funds. It just means that we constrict the amount of people that we can give the money to.
Thank you.
Representative Braddock.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so you said that y'all are basing it on daily sales. So are you also working with companies that have a longer term sales cycle and like a larger project base that isn't necessarily a daily sale, or are you mostly targeting daily sales type operations?
Right now, the sweet spot for us to be able to help businesses are small businesses that are up to $10 million that have what we call smaller ticket amounts that happen on a more consistent basis, as opposed to one-time kinds of events that happen, monthly, for example.
Okay, and then what type of how are you collateralizing your loans, or is it like an accounts receivable that you're using to back it? How are you?
Well, there are different products, and basically, on one of the products, for example, is that there is no collateral required, and we are basing our risk on our ability to forecast. So in this product, for example, is that if we make a mistake and we forecast that you're going to make a certain amount of sales over the next year, and for whatever reason, either you go out of business legitimately or we decide to tear the road up in front of your business and business cuts in half by 50% and it takes us twice as long in order to collect what we get, that's the risk that we bear, and there is no recourse on that business owner. So it really depends on the product in terms of what's required, but generally there's no collateral required on most of the products, and there's not even any recourse on at least half of the products.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? All right. Diane, thank you for presenting that. That is indeed, it's different. It looks like y'all taken a very different approach to helping capitalize some of our small businesses. I know you had some information. I don't know if you would like to maybe get some to Kayla or to Janae, and we could certainly get some information out to our committee members that they may want to read
Sure.
farther if you would like.
That'd be great. I just want to leave with the parting thought that we have been in Kennesaw for 14 years. We have resources to be able to help small businesses, and our hope is that we can try to funnel them first into the state in which we serve.
Well, I know we certainly appreciate that. Thank you, Diane. All right. Our next guest is Mary Hollins with Gables Residential, and she is accompanied by Hayden Stanley with the Georgia Apartment Association. I thought you'd brought lunch, Hayden. I thought you had lunch there. Good gracious. All right. Well, take it away.
Good morning, and thank you for providing the opportunity for us to visit with you today. My name is Hayden Stanley. I represent the Georgia Apartment Association. I think many of you are familiar with the association. They're comprised of owners and managers and developers of apartment communities throughout Georgia, providing homes to 1.4 million Georgians. Directly, they employ more than 5,000 people in the state, and indirectly, certainly many more than that. This morning, Mary Hollins with Gables Residential has joined me, and we've asked her to come today and talk to you about her experience with local government inspections. I'm going to talk generally about a few examples that our members have brought to us so that you'll know that Mary's experience and Gables' experience is not unique. First of all, our industry, like many, is heavily governed at the state, federal, and local level. We comply with landlord-tenant laws, construction, accessibility issues, fair housing, environmental issues, many, many more. I think as diverse as this committee's committee assignments are, we've probably testified at some point in front of you in your capacity across the board. So we're heavily regulated, and that's okay generally. We recognize, and in fact we embrace, that good, reasonable regulations in a variety of areas, when they're applied properly and reasonably, are good for everybody. However, there's a trend that we've noted in this industry and local government over the past 10 years, and certainly in the past recent years, where times have gotten tight, both in the economy and as a result of that with local government, where we've slipped in some cases from reasonable administration of local laws into something, in this case, we think bordering on harassment of an industry. We've seen an increase in local registration, property registration schemes. I know the General Assembly over the last 2 years has been dealing with an effort to put in reasonable restrictions on how property registration is handled at the local level, and more recently and more specifically in inspection schemes. We want to talk to you today about experiences that our members have had in the city of Dunwoody. And while every community has the obligation, we think, to make sure that blighted properties, unsafe property is brought up to code, and some do it very well. I'll say Gwinnett County works with their property owners in a reasonable way. However, some of the cities have started an approach where they clearly overreach their authority. A couple of examples from other properties before I ask Mary to talk about her experience here. One of our members with 2 properties in the city dealt with this. Their code enforcement spent a week at each property. They told them that until these items are brought up to their level of their interpretation of what it needs to be, that they can't rent the vacant units, they can't renew their business license, and the properties can't be sold until all of those items are addressed and fixed in agreed upon time frame. Well, you can understand what that's going to do to a business operation. Apparently the fine is $1,300 per violation per day. And that's okay if we're talking about life safety issues that must be addressed immediately. But we're talking about items such as an expired tag on a car in their lot. Anywhere that paint is chipped had to be repainted. Regrading every building, regardless of whether they had been any evidence or any experience of flooding issues, including the mail house, which is not a dwelling, and on like that. They wisely, at an initial meeting, the Dunwoody's lawyer was reportedly there, and so our member wisely said, we think we're going to need to bring an attorney because these items you've identified are very expensive, and we're not sure that we agree that they're all life safety type issues. And they were, the quote that has been given to me is, it would not work out well for them if they brought lawyers to the meetings. So that is an environment that is not hospitable to ownership or to being a good corporate citizen. Another person who was unable to join us at the last minute has a community, an apartment community that was delivered 18 months. It received its CO, it's a brand new property, 18 months before their inspection. Yet their inspection resulted in about a $6,000 repair bill for the 36 items that were identified, 17 pages of photos, and a week of impacting the operations on site. Mary, if I could, I'd like to ask you to just share your experience. Again, I appreciate Mary coming down today. She's got a day job, and she's not used to testifying before legislative committees. I told her that you all are just here to listen to what we have to say, and so we appreciate that. Mary, if you'll tell us a little bit about Gables as a company and then our experience in Dunwoody.
Good morning, and thank you guys for hearing from us. I work for Gables Residential, and our company has been operating across the United States for over 30 years. I personally have been part of Gables Residential for 19 of those 30, and have operated in many different regions as well in several different positions, including on-site. So I have a very good understanding of how to operate a property and fire life safety issues, as well as maintaining an asset, to be part of a community, as well to have a great home for our residents. So in sharing my history, I think that's relevant because in all of those 19 years, this is one of the most extreme inspections that we have experienced. When we have inspectors come on for life safety issues, it's a very simple process for us. We take the lists and we make the corrections and we continue to operate. In this particular case, it's a little bit foreign to us, so we reached out to our local apartment association where we are members, and we asked for a little bit of guidance, and we asked, is anyone else experiencing these types of inspections, because this is a little bit extreme for what we are used to. This particular inspection, two city officials showed up at the property. They properly notified us that they would be on the property, and we welcomed them and we helped them to get around. They were there for about 2.5 months, working through the 96 acres that we have and the over 100 buildings on that particular property. And the first round of inspection lists is what you see before us today. These are 6 different binders filled with property area specific, and then one of them has a list of 27 different items in it that apply to every single building. What is most extreme are some of the examples that the interpretation of the building code has been presented to us as required corrections. And so the interpretation of the code is where then we had to reach out to the apartment association as well as a lawyer to help us to decide what has to be done and what is a recommendation. As presented to us, it was required, where the code kind of indicates that it should be more of a recommendation of a correction. I'll give you a couple of examples. The buildings were CO'd when they were built, and the railings throughout the property they have a square top to them. The code, the current code, is to have a round top, and so one of the requirements is for us to replace the railings throughout the community, and it's over 100 buildings, and each building can have up to 4 different sets of railings that go up anywhere from 2 to 3 floors. The building's design and architectural designs were signed off on, and the buildings were CO'd with no gutters or partial gutters on the buildings, and the requirement in these inspections are that gutters have to be placed around all of the buildings. There are a lot of there's a whole book on foundational requirements to regrade around the buildings. And then one other very large is the retention ponds. There are 5 retention ponds on the property, and they are being required to have a survey done on them and restored back to the original volume when the property was built. And that's over 20 years worth of nature growing, and not that they don't have to be able to handle the volume of water, but there is no failing of them at this point. So those are some of the big ticket items that are left for interpretation of what the code is. And from a business standpoint, it's over, just the basic inspection items are over $2 million worth of corrections with a 6-month period to get it taken care of. And then that does not even include the survey one for the retention ponds, and we're looking at, that's probably going to be somewhere in the nature of 1 to 2 million more.
Thank you. We're not sure that we have the answer for you, but we continue to run into this type of environment. This industry, the members of this association collectively pay nearly $1.5 billion in taxes within this state. Each local community needs to protect their citizens, and we get that, and their property owners, and we get that. But we are citizens, and we are property owners, and we are contributors to that local economy. And so as you go forth and do your work, we may come back to you in your capacity on this committee or whatever the right capacity would be on asking for some help in reasonable application of these codes, because we believe that it's gotten out of hand in some instances, and we worry that we're going to see more of that.
I know the committee's probably going to have some questions, so if y'all don't mind, Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hey, Mayor, where is the Gables? Did you say Dunwoody?
This is Broadstone Dunwoody. We operate the property on behalf of a fee client. It's right off of 285 in Shallowford.
Hey, and if I might ask, does this, now your association statewide, even though predominantly probably most of your members is in the more metro area?
The majority of apartment communities are in the metro area, yes, sir.
Do y'all see a trend, this overzealousness of these rules and regs by local governments? Do you see that that's mostly in the metro area?
We've had, and I defer to Derek Norton, who's Government Affairs Director, but I think that we had a situation in Savannah recently, though I don't know that it was as aggressive as this. But yes, sir, generally speaking, I think that we find this metro area is the...
And probably, I guess it'd be safe to say that most of this seems to be generating out of DeKalb County.
I don't think I could say that.
Think you
but
could.
Certainly, City of Dunwoody is the brightest star at this point.
What about in the unincorporated parts of DeKalb? And I'm asking that question not to per se bash
Yes, sir.
DeKalb County, but
primarily we're dealing with the city.
I'm not asking that to, put DeKalb County on the spot, but from my service on another committee that has consistently had to deal with new incorporations, there seems to be a dysfunctionality in that county as far as their rule making, the blighted property issues and such like that, and seems to be a mindset. I don't think that this would be a problem in areas such as in Hart County and places like that as you get away from this type of area, but it seems like in the metro areas they have such a spirit. I'm being very courteous.
Yes, you are.
A spirit as far as control and trying to use it as a revenue generator in a lot of cases, which has been a major concern to me. And anybody from DeKalb County, if I'm stepping on your toes, and I feel free to accept it that way. I mean,
now, other than the embed, I would say on the inspection that what we've come to specifically today, there are certainly embedded costs to the property owners for compliance, for hiring the inspectors on the internal units, but they're not generating fees in this instance. However, the registry schemes that I've talked about, the vacant property registries, those do have a cost attached to those. And that's where we see the generation of local funds.
if I might ask a question, has your association, have y'all considered possibly getting with some of the legislators and looking for a quote, maybe legislation to identify a Bill of Rights for not just apartment owners and management, but also the real estate, the folks in the real estate business? And I ask that question because, we've been dealing with certain things that have generated out of DeKalb County, the registry scheme and such as that. That's, to all appearances, seems to be more about raising revenue than not just totally them being able to handle this. But have y'all thought about joining forces with, quote, the other folks as a property owner Bill of Rights, so to say?
That's a fantastic idea. We've certainly worked as a coalition with other organizations that represent the real estate industry, different parts of it, and we've been working again trying to do something about these vacant property registers. It's not isolated to DeKalb County. There are some dozen to more than that of registry schemes. That's a great idea. It's too bad that we have to come down here with a Bill of Rights, because we feel like that we should have that. You can expect to see one, I suspect, now.
If I might make one further comment, Mr. Chairman, from someone who has been around here for a pretty good while and has watched the transition of public policies, and somebody who comes from the, originally I was a county commission chairman way back a long time ago. I've been watching this transition, and, we tend to believe, and we talk a lot about home rule, letting local governments tend to their business. And, that's all fine and well until the death of common sense takes effect. And, and I hate to keep talking about it, invoking the name DeKalb County, but, we see so much of this that comes out of DeKalb. They certainly have a different population over there, and it's divided between the northern and southern part of the county. But they continue to invent new ideas. And these ideas all seem to stem around basically raising revenue, raising money, because at what point you have to understand a fee does become a tax. And then these things that we're sitting here that I'm hearing y'all talk about railing. Well, I know a little bit, being in the real estate business, I know a little bit about what these type of things cost. But when you say that you got to replace it because you got a square knob on the top as opposed to a round knob, it just sort of, these are things that it's basically local. It's not a state issue, but it appears to me that it may be high time that we take these things to task on this Bill of Rights, perhaps. And that in itself is going to be a yeoman's task.
Yes, sir.
But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I think to follow up, and I know we've got several members who want to ask questions, I want to make sure going forward, because I think in hearing testimony this session, one of the issues that is we're hearing is that we're trying to segregate federal, state, and local regulations, ordinances, and I want to make sure. I mean, we go back to a square handle. That's just a local ordinance, or is that in state code somewhere?
That's from the national, the building codes that they are choosing
The state of
to
Georgia,
follow.
through the Department of Community Affairs, and then there are two codes that are enforced through the state fire commissioner's office. The state law adopts and prescribes mandatory minimum codes, and there are, Sean, what are there? Maybe 7 of those. They're International Building Code, International Residential Code, plumbing, mechanical, gas. Then there is another set of codes that are optional. So the mandatory codes have to be complied with, whether a local government adopts and enforces those or not. Most of the populated communities adopt and enforce those locally. There are also these optional codes, which are the International Property Management Code, or Property Maintenance Code, I think.
Yes.
And some others that local government is then has the option to adopt and enforce and amend as they wish. And that I would defer you to the Department of Community Affairs on that. However, there is a place in Georgia code where you set the process for code adoption and for code adoption. There may be some areas that the state could intersect this.
So I guess going back to my question, and I'm just picking this as an example, the rail. It sounds like this is a local. They've adopted something over and above perhaps the state ordinance or the state codes regarding this issue.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. All right. Go for it.
That is actually state code for new construction. And
my question directly was, what was their comment about grandfathering that structure in? Because that is what most communities do.
Well, what we heard in the meeting when they gave us the books, that was absolutely one of our questions, that, these are 20-year-old buildings, and to bring them up to that code. And verbally they said to us, yeah, it's going to be required for you to replace them, which is then now why we are consulting our lawyer for interpretation of the code that they've adopted. So, and there seems to be a difference of opinion. And that is one of our points, is that it doesn't seem to match the code compliance. To have us do it, it seems to be that they want us to bring us up to current code, and that does not make sense.
I think that's where the rubber meets the road.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, to answer your question, Mr. Chairman, that is new current code.
Right.
There are minimum standards for railings, and the concept is to be able to grip a railing as opposed to have something, say 8 inches wide and flat that you can't get a hold of. But the typical practice, and this is the first I've heard of a jurisdiction actually doing this, is the typical practice is that you cannot, under life safety, you can require that they be brought up to current standards in current code. But in these other applicable type of situations, their structures are grandfathered because it would be completely impractical to have and run around and make every property owner change something every year or every 2 years when the new code is adopted. Prime example of that's the energy code, and there's been some very strict regulations put into that from the federal that's adopted by the state. And it's common sense to make your buildings energy efficient as possible, but it's impractical to go in and replace insulation on a wall once it's built. Mm-hmm. So, typically you see those grandfathering. My question to you guys is, obviously you're addressing that through your attorneys, but have you approached DCA and looked at a situation, maybe from the association, of not carving out, it's not the right word, but having it implicitly stated that new codes go into effect other than life safety do not affect existing CO'd structures? Have you asked them to make that?
We continue to talk with both in the state fire commissioners in charge of life safety issues. I think that's recognized throughout. What a building is when they receive their CO, I think that's largely recognized. There are areas within the code adoption process that I think that this legislature could give DCA, such as standing the authority to give interpretation of the code that applies up and down the line. They don't have that now, as I understand it. I think that they can say this is what we think, but it's not binding on local governments.
Well, and that's why I would go one step further there, is to make it binding. Yeah. If that those minimum codes are binding, the optional codes are not binding, but I think that the state, that would be one place that you could do that, is that the grandfathering, quote unquote, concept could be binding from the state level, and that might address some of these problems. One other point, I'm looking up and down this area up here, and there are a number of us that voted to approve the city of Dunwoody a couple years ago. And we all know that cities are the creation of the legislature. Have you spoken directly to the legislators that represent Dunwoody and asked them about this issue?
We've had more casual conversations in that regard, and we're certainly not here asking you to repeal Dunwoody's charter.
And I'm not suggesting that we are.
That's going to get ugly on the site.
But my point being is that if this is such a new situation for them, and maybe some wise advice could be given to the city leaders from those members.
Are you saying, Representative, sort of like Representative Powell, that their spirits are a little high, that they may need to be calmed down? Is that?
Well, I think wise counsel is a
think it's Representative Braddock, or is it Clark? All right.
Thank you. I appreciate Hayden. Thank you for coming down here and bringing your client there. Owning one of my businesses being a real estate investment and management company, I certainly am sympathetic to what I'm hearing today. Don't have any experience with apartment buildings, so this is a lot to learn yet. But a couple questions I have. One is, how often are these inspections?
The external one will be annual, so they'll come back each year and re-inspect. The internal ones are also annual. They did 100% 2 years ago, and then every year after they'll do 20% of your unit count.
Okay. You mentioned Savannah and you mentioned Dunwoody. So is this getting to be a serious problem, in my understanding, this in the last couple of years?
If I could, do you mind, Mr. Chairman?
If you will, yeah. I'm Derek Norton, Director of Governmental Affairs for the Apartment Association. I'd say that it is becoming a big problem because what you're seeing is the building officials and code officials in a city like Dunwoody are teaching some of the classes in the other areas on code enforcement and how they're doing things, and so that's how we see it spreading to other areas. You know, they had some representatives from Cobb County there on site with them on some of these inspections, showing them what they were doing. So that's how it's going from community to community.
And this is in the last 3-5 years. This has gotten more prolific.
This is our first external inspection.
Your first external in 19 years.
Since Dunwoody.
Since
Yeah,
Dunwoody,
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Derek, before you leave, and I, again, for this committee, as we're listening, we're also trying to, from a larger picture, start to delineate or segregate out, what is by local ordinance, state, federal, and I understand some of this is an interpretation issue, but I'm also interested from your knowledge of all of these issues across all of the different local governments. Could you segregate those issues out and maybe give us a sort of a report of what you're seeing? The issues. Is it interpretations versus, okay, no, this is a separate ordinance that is going above and beyond the state code?
I'd say it's an issue of interpretation. A great example is both the city of Woodstock and the city of Dunwoody adopted the International Property Maintenance Code into their code of ordinances. The city of Woodstock, we've had no issues. They've worked with us. There's been no friction. Everything's worked seamlessly. And then you have, because they've only focused on the life safety issues and the minimum standards. But then you have an example like this where they go with 6 finders and are interpreting that code to mean go way beyond the scope of life safety and public welfare.
Okay. I still would like for you to if you could, give us a summary of what you're seeing, different issues, the different jurisdictions that you're dealing with.
We can do that.
That would help us in our bigger picture of as this committee continues to put together a framework of how we're going to look at issues and what issues are I guess systemic, I guess, that we're seeing across the board. So I would certainly appreciate that.
Ask one more?
Yes, go ahead.
One other question. Could you elaborate a little bit further on the vacant property registry, and how that's affecting apartment complexes?
Yeah, and I bring that up in how it impacts property owners across the board. There's a House bill that came out that resides in the Senate now that attempts to get to that. And a challenge is that vacant properties, by virtue of being vacant, do not necessarily need to be registered.
Mm-hmm.
Dilapidated, blighted, or abandoned properties, I wouldn't argue that there's a public need to register those so that you can access when there are code enforcement issues. However, charging an annual fee to a property merely because it's vacant seems to be more of a revenue generating initiative
Thank you. And I also have concern with last year's bill and voted against it. But I'm not understanding what maybe I missed. I'm not sure how apartment complexes were involved in that.
Well, the current the current bill, which is in play, which hopefully will pass, has an exemption for where there's a unit, where there's at least one unit that is occupied or has utility power to it, then they would be exempt from a local vacant property registry. However, at this point, there are no protections for property owners against local government's adoption of vacant property registry. Gwinnett added that language when they adopted theirs. Mm-hmm. So for the multifamily apartment industry, that is not an issue in Gwinnett. However, there are a dozen others that may or may not contain that. Some deal with commercial properties, which would require the registration of all commercial properties that are vacant. And then certainly you have the single-family properties that are out there. Some are listed for sale, others are not.
So you could have units, you're saying, within an apartment. Your concern is there could be units within an apartment complex that are vacant, and you'd have to, even though half the complex is rented out, you'd have to register those individual units, is your concern?
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, again, Gwinnett County is an example of a county that has adopted an ordinance, and they accommodated that concern. But that's because they chose to,
mm-hmm.
that they weren't required to.
Thank you.
Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick questions. If you were to be able to summarize where your challenges or the barriers were in this process, how much of it was related to the state, how much of it perhaps to DeKalb County, and how much of it to the city of Dunwoody?
I would say the challenges are out of Dunwoody.
Okay.
And I would say that without some interaction by the state, we are exposed to Dunwoody's approach throughout, without some type of reasonable guidelines that they would need to follow. So I see there's a role for both. The problem exists at the local level. Our protection, we hope, will come from the state level.
Gotcha. And if you were to assess, where the opportunity to resolve this, could you speak to what we might be able to do to help ameliorate the problem?
If I could, in following up to the chairman's request, we will provide you with a summary of the issues that we have and some proposed changes. It may be a change in the way that the codes are adopted for granting some type of binding interpretive authority to a state agency, or a combination of many things, setting parameters on what these ordinances ought to look like.
And one final question. When were you made aware that these restrictions or ordinances existed? When they came out to do the inspection, was there any opportunity for you to understand what the code restrictions were prior to them coming out and giving an inspection?
I would assume because the international codes are in place and updated, I think they're updated annually, that that's available for any property owner. We were given a notice that they would be coming to the property probably about 90 days in advance. But again, it being it the first time, not just kind of accommodating them to come on the property, not knowing what they're going to be looking at.
And I would say, Derek, isn't it true, the industry and the association has known all along that this ordinance was coming, was adopted, and is going to be enforced. So it hasn't been a gotcha situation at all. It's been full bore in your face.
Any other questions from committee members? Thank you. I think this has been pretty enlightening, and it certainly, not only to your specific industry, but in what we're doing as a whole to start looking at how regulations are affecting different businesses, and how our local, state, and federal regulations fit together. I certainly appreciate this. It's been very enlightening, and again, if you would, follow back up with sort of that summary, the different jurisdictions in your issues, that would help us as we go forward. And we appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thank
You've
you
been
for
very,
your time.
very generous with
If the vice chair would take the helm, I've got a 11 o'clock meeting, and we'll come back as soon as that is over. I would appreciate it. Okay. Well, Secretary.
Okay. All right, I think David Ernst with Ernst Concrete is next on our agenda. David, if you would.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and members of the committee. On behalf of the ready-mix construction industry and our members of our state association, I'd like to thank you for the time here today to express some of our concerns within our industry. My name is David Ernst. I am owner of Ernst Concrete, which is a local ready-mix producer. Our main office is out of Lawrenceville, Georgia. We have 7 sites that are spread out the metro Atlanta area. We employ a little over 100 employees here statewide. I also serve on the chairman as the Georgia Concrete Products Association. The association roughly represents about 70% of the ready-mix producers in the state, so I think we have a pretty good following. Today I'd like to talk about one of the concerns as a business owner and what I'm hearing from some of our members. Some of these things have come to light through my own experiences as a business owner, and some of these experiences have come from some of our members. So I'd like to express some of those here today. Some of the things I'd like to talk about is the workers' compensation issues that we have been experiencing here, roughly more specifically over the last 4 to 5 years, with the abilities to try to find insurance companies that write our type of industry. Here recently, the amount of carriers that will write our industry has become less and less throughout the years. Used to, when you would have a policy written, you'd have several people that would quote you policy quotes, and it was never really a hard issue to deal with different people. Here lately, it seems like it's like a handful of folks that would actually write in our industry, and it seems like it's actually driving insurance carriers out of the ready-mix industry or the heavy industrial construction industry to where it's just a small handful of people that will do it. I believe that at some point in time, if the demand or the supply of carriers is very limited, that we're going to have troubles writing claims. And in that, I think the prices of writing policies will go a lot higher for our industry and probably other related industries that deal with heavy industrial type activities. A couple of the things that I wanted to bring to mind, that one of the things as a business owner, you have to post a panel of physicians at the work site. It's a panel of physicians. It has certain requirements that must be listed. I think it's 6 different type of doctors or facilities. Has to have their addresses, phone numbers. There's just a certain amount of criteria that needs to be on this panel of physicians, and it has to be posted in a specific area that it can be locally or easily recognized. Some of the issues there, which I don't know if you want to call them technicalities or areas to where a panel of physicians can be validated when they have all the correct information. But if there's any changes that maybe sometimes an employer is not aware of, like if the doctor's office actually moves or changes a phone number and the information is incorrect, they can invalidate that panel. So basically, if you have an employee that has a claim, and let's just say the claimant has an attorney representing him, usually what, I don't want to say that happens, is that's the first thing that they'll look at. They'll look at the panel of physicians and to see if there's any discrepancy in that to invalidate it. Once that panel is invalidated, that employee can go anywhere he chooses to go to seek medical treatment. So it pretty much takes it, I don't want to say out of your hand, but the involvement of the employer, is basically gone. And it just, it's kind of like a technicality where it's not purposely done, but there is a rule that it will invalidate that panel. And I think that it's, in some cases in other neighboring states, they don't have to post the panel of physicians. They have to certify when the employee first recognizes that he's been injured to report the injury, that they will certify that they give him the proper doctors or the facilities to go to seek medical treatment. In some cases, there have been, with the panel of physicians posted, where an employee, without even making a claim or a statement that he was injured, he will actually go to one of those doctors on the panels of physicians and start seeking medical treatment without even making a reported claim, until it's already, you're getting phone calls from the doctor's office and you're trying to wonder what happened. It kind of gives them access to do that. So I think it's a way to keep employers and employees kind of in check as far as proper involvement with the process. I mean, the process in general, as me speaking for our company, and I'm sure a lot of other business owners, workers' comp is there to protect employees, to try to get them the proper care, to try to, we have employees that I don't want anybody to go not treated and helped if they are injured. It's there for the cases there that it happens, unfortunately. But that was one of the issues there that was mentioned to me. Also, the way Georgia is known as a return to work state versus some of our neighboring states, which are maximum medical improvement status, to where when an employee is injured and he's going through all the, whatever the proper rehabilitation things, the processes, surgeries and stuff like that, he will reach at some point a maximum medical improvement where he's to the point where he cannot get any better, whatever the situation is. With Georgia, basically the return to work state, the indemnity benefits must be paid continually through the whole process. Let me go back to other states. When an employee reaches maximum medical improvement, the indemnity benefits basically are like the weekly benefits that are paid besides the permanency ratings that they get. Like if it's I don't know what the dollar amounts are for each incident there, but they will be assigned a certain dollar value plus the weekly benefits that they get. In other states, once they reach maximum medical improvement, that indemnity benefit is kind of stopped, and then they should be going back to work, basically. With the Georgia, if the person reaches maximum medical improvement, he still will get his weekly benefit, even if there's not a job for him to come back to. Some people might have limited duty, or let's just say the job is, maybe it's no longer available. One of the things with our construction industry there, with roughly our business is probably down 75% from the heydays in the 2005 and 2006. Well, we've had, I mean, our company alone had 250 employees in the good days. We're down to about 105. I mean, that's a lot of people that we've had to let go over the years. If we had a person that was off on a claim and was getting back to work, if we had to basically lay off anybody in that position, he would continually to get indemnity benefits until the cows come home, basically, until he went to work somewhere else. Sometimes that doesn't always happen. That's one of the things that was also brought up. Also on the 240 rule, basically when we're trying to get an employee back to work after an injury and he's basically has a physician that does a job description that is suitable for him, like we will produce a job description and the physician will look over the job description, and let's just say it's the employee's ability to come and sweep the floors. I mean, he used to maybe do something a little bit more physically, but he is able to sweep the floors or do, restricted type work. If an employee comes back to work based under those guidelines, if he comes back within 15 days and decides, even though it was stated that the doctor, he would be able to perform those functions, if he comes back within 15 days, he can leave the site for no real apparent reasons other than he says he cannot do the work. Basically, the indemnity benefits just keep on going. You have to go through a process of getting a reevaluation on this employee. There has been times where an employee was able to come back to work very light duty sweeping floors. He couldn't do that. We offered him a position in signing delivery tickets. He still cannot do that, and he got to go home. And basically the benefits and the whole thing started all over as far as trying to submit the paperwork for him back to the doctor saying, okay, what is his physical abilities now? What can he actually do? And trying to get him back in the cycle. And it's really frustrating especially when we're trying to get people back to work. When you have an employee, it's in some instances that will try to use this 15-day rule, that it kind of demoralizes the other employees when they know he could be not doing everything he can to come back to work, that he's being guided along. Also, on a recent court case here in Georgia where employers were barred, or people representing the employer have been barred from being in any communication. I think it was the ex parte communications piece in House Bill 971, where the language would have permitted communication between the employer, the physician, and the employee. Now that has been taken away from the employer, or now we will no longer be able to have that communication where you're trying to be involved with the claims process. Because, I mean, everyone wants to try to get that employee back to work status, back to the original position he was in. Now it leaves a gap in that involvement. I think the language that was in place would have permitted, but I think the House Bill 971, I think they took a lot of things out of it. And I think it's just another little thing that just hurts the abilities for a company to be involved with their case. Basically it's a policy that the company has, and it limits that. Also on the NCCI discount for Georgia's employers, as far as when the National Council of Compensation, basically they have certain guidelines where they can reference the experience mod, which our premiums and all that stuff are kind of calculated on. Other states, basically on all medical expenses, basically has a 30% allotment on that value, where it's like a 70% discount on total medical benefits, basically on the excess, the primary loss value, and even into the excess excess loss category. The other states, basically, you get that 70% discount in formulating your mod rate. The state of Georgia does not observe that ruling. The state of Georgia has 100% exposure to that medical benefits or those medical expenses paid. So basically, it's going to make you have a hard time getting a mod rate to give you a premium that is cost effective. You know, it's a cost of doing business. Maybe it's being competitive with other states as far as what you might pay per capita, per payroll for your mod rate. I think even sometimes there, if you had an employee that got injured, you would probably be less likely to put it against your workers' comp and just pay the claim yourself and not have it go against your experience mod. Just thinking about competitive issues in the state of Georgia, and I know with our industry we've been up against a lot of tough times, and when we're really looking at some of these things that really come to light. You know, the state of Georgia is a great place to do business. I think this workers' comp, and I don't want to say that, again, with the spirit of the law, I'm not about stepping on that. I'm about trying to protect most of the employees and their companies as far as that small percent of people that kind of take advantage of these loopholes. You know, Georgia wants to be a business-friendly state. You know, I don't know different companies how they look at what it costs to do business in the state of Georgia, and you know, as far as coming in here, what would they actually look at? Do they look at this type of stuff? What kind of laws do they have in place? I just wanted to just bring this up there, that I would ask your consideration to see how we as a group could come up with some suggestions and some ideas to have you look at this in a serious matter and get your thoughts after what I've said.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions from committee members? I have a couple, I guess. I'm have been somewhat familiar with workers' comp in the past. Are you being forced into assigned risk pools, or are you still able to get private insurance? You said that the number of...
We're still being able to get insurance.
All right. So it's basically the insurance regulations that you see as a major problem of the increased cost. Is that...
In the state of Georgia.
All right. And you mentioned several things that other states do differently.
Yes.
I made notes of those. Do you have those in a presentation form there?
I have a kind of like a summary, but maybe not an example of what Georgia does and what Tennessee or Alabama or any of the southeastern states. I do not have that in writing, but I could get that.
All right. If you could get us get the committee a list like that, I think it'd be most helpful in what we're doing. And I don't know. I guess most of what you have talked about this morning would come under the insurance commissioner, but then there is a workers' comp board also. Do a lot of the problems you have go before that workers' comp board, or is it strictly through the insurance?
Well, I think it goes through a committee, an advisory committee.
Well, most of these rules come from the State Board of Workers' Compensation, and most of their rules, I think, from what I've learned as we've studied this issue, come out of an advisory council that's made up of both plaintiffs' attorneys and business interests. And I think the State Board of Workers' Comp generally, and the legislature has traditionally leaned on their recommendations. But I think with the competing sides, if you will, both at the table, you don't see, you see bits and pieces occur, but you don't necessarily see major reform.
Okay, thank you. 24, is that Representative Braddock?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You said that you had about 250 employees, and now you're down to around 105 or so. And you mentioned that that sometimes when they're being released, if there's not a job for them to go back to, they're continuing to stay on benefits until they get another job. Is that a substantial number? Or how many would you say have done that in your?
As far as our company, I want to say that we probably had over the last, let's say 3 or 4 years, we probably had 3 people.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any further questions from committee members? Mr. Ernst, thank you very much for your presentation. And if you could get us that list of the things basically that other states do differently that might be a little less burdensome to your business, we'd appreciate it.
We will do that, Mr. Secretary. Right. Thank you again. Thank you.
Charles McCrae. Mr. McCrae, you are CChem Laboratories, is that correct?
That's right.
Yes, if you would give us a little background on exactly what CChem is, and then let us know what your problems are.
Of course. I'd also like to introduce you to Dr. Gregory Morin, who is the CEO of CChem Laboratories, and he'll be here to lend some of his experience and expertise on this. Sure.
I'll give you a little bit of background. What we do is we manufacture products for aquariums and other pet-related products, such as reptiles, things like that, people that keep them as pets, basically. We've been in business for over 30 years. It's a second-generation company. My father founded this company over 30 years ago, and now I'm leading it. And he had a background in chemistry, as I do as well, and that facilitates us to understand and create the products, understand how they work. And a lot of the regulatory issues that we have run into the past overlap with chemistry experience, because a lot of the issues, you can tell they're written by legislatures that do not have that type of background. They're kind of written in a black hole where they think, well, this will do that, but that's not how those things operate. And then those regulations govern us, and they kind of tie our hands behind our back. We're unable to do certain things that we'd like to do.
Basically, I'd like to show you some things that we make that are regulated. These bottles here are considered feeds under the Georgia feed law. Actually, that's a fertilizer. But these are just, this here is a bottle of water and iodide, and this is a bottle of water and, what is that, calcium chloride? Yeah. Because most of the feed laws were written to protect the public and the agricultural industry from bad feed that gets into the food supply, mostly for terrestrial mammals that might end up on the tables of people. When these same laws are applied to our industry, we're applying them to hundreds and hundreds of different species that are very different biologically from terrestrial mammals. And so, within 2 square feet of water, for example, if someone had a reef tank, you're going to easily have over 30 different species representing 4 or 5 different phyla. Some of these animals don't have brains. Some of them are partially photosynthetic. When you have a very broad definition of what a feed is for an animal, or something that is taxonomically considered an animal, which might be more like a plant, then you get very ambiguous results, and what we consider to be some perverse phenomena when these laws are applied to the animals that we make products for. When we're talking about a feed that some animal might metabolize, well, a lot of these animals are photosynthetic, like I said. Is light a feed? We have, there's a large part of our market that develops lights specifically for these animals. or little microorganisms, algae and things like that that grow in the water naturally, they also metabolize. And because these laws that also coincide with the labeling laws, they restrict what we're able to innovate on, what we're able to develop, and what we can ultimately say about the products, because a lot of the labeling laws are based on nutrients that make sense for terrestrial mammals. And so, if we're restricted in what we can say on our bottle, what it does, and things like that, then it limits consumer choice, it limits what we're able to make, it limits what we're able to put out there. More generally, as far as this, I guess, limiting red tape goes, and a general, I guess, idea towards reining in restrictions, I would have to submit to you that for these specific products, we pay less to sell these in all of the European Union than we do for just the state of Georgia. So we pay more to sell these bottles in the state of Georgia than the entire European Union. And that goes for medications as well. Medications are regulated differently because they are under different agencies. In some ways in this industry that might be a contrived dichotomy or a contrived classification there. The European Union has actually carved a niche out for our industry, aquarium species, because a lot of the materials in them and a lot of the medications have been around for so long and are so inert or safe, and they don't want to spend the money regulating a goldfish because they're so different, and it's all made for such a different purpose than the original feed laws and medication laws and fertilizer laws were made. Because of the type of things that we're doing, someone is having to recreate the entire environment within a box. And these products are specifically tailored for those environments, and these are on a level and a volume that none of these could ever achieve an economy of scale in Georgia's climate, because it has to be very carefully controlled and maintained within a limited space for that purpose. So these types of things, you would never have to worry about them getting to such a level of volume that they're causing phosphate problems in the rivers or anything like that. They're such a very finely tuned instrument for maintaining a very small environment and a small space that the original reasons of protecting public interest don't really come into play here.
All right. Thanks very much. Do we have questions? Representative Braddock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the return to a science lesson. There's a lot of words there that I haven't heard in a long time since I took my last science class. It would be helpful if you could put together like maybe a matrix of that would say, what the law is, what level it's at, whether it's state or federal, what department it's coming out of, USDA, FDA, EPA, and then the problem it's causing, and then your proposed solution. Is that something y'all could put together to help us kind of narrow down? And
and I can kind of give you a big picture, broad picture of the issue that we face. The issues are twofold. There's feed laws and there's fertilizer laws.
Okay.
Surprisingly enough, we really don't have any, at the federal level, it's not an issue at all, because the federal government doesn't really regulate feed or fertilizers to any significant extent. They regulate medications through FDA and pesticides through EPA. Now, Georgia also has a pesticide regulation as well. But the primary issue that we have is with the feed and fertilizers. Basically, the laws are written toward terrestrial agriculture for protecting the public interest, of protecting, making sure that everything is good and wholesome and getting into our bodies and is what it's supposed to be. But because of the broad way those laws were crafted, the way they're written to classify animals or plant, basically that encompasses anything, whether it's for human consumption or not. So it classifies these fish in an aquarium or a plant in an aquarium. So we have fertilizer products as well. A big part of the hobby now is cultivating aquatic plants in the aquarium because they look nice. People like the way they look. And these are also classified as fertilizers. So we have to comply with the strictures of terrestrial agricultural laws, which are written for terrestrial plants. So, for example, one of the issues we have, for example, is a product called Flourish Iron, which is able to take, aquatic plants can take up nutrients through their leaves as well, which is called foliar feeding, as well as through the roots. But the laws are written assuming that only root uptake is possible. So any product that advocates that nutrients will be absorbed through foliar means, you can't sell that. You're making a claim that our rules say you can't make, therefore you can't put that on the bottle. You can put it in the bottle, you just can't tell anybody that that's what it's for. So it's kind of this ridiculous scenario where our hands are tied. We're actually producing a product that is competitive in the market, but we're not allowed to make that competitive claim because of these laws, which are written for basically farms. The strictures are related to, there's an AFCO handbook, American Association of Feed Control Officials, and an equivalent one for fertilizers as well. And basically, whatever's in those handbooks, that's what Georgia uses, and most of the other states in this country also use that particular handbook. So if you have something new, something that shows efficacy through research, you have to get it in there, and the barrier to do that is insurmountable because basically those people don't care about that. They're concerned with feed and fertilizer for farms, for agriculture. That's their primary purpose. So basically, we're never going to be able to breach that barrier. In terms of what we would like to see, we would like to see an exception in the law for regulation of industries that are not for products that are not going to be used in final human consumption. That a human is not going to eat these animals, it's not going to eat these plants, that's not the stated goal at all. It's basically cosmetic husbandry is what is occurring. So there's really, in my way of looking at it, no compelling state interest, if that is the threshold that we set. A compelling state interest in maintaining human health and safety, fine. For agriculture, that's fine. But there really isn't a state interest in what we're producing and manufacturing, because the worst case scenario is we make something and a fish dies. Okay, is there a compelling state interest to make sure that a fish never, ever dies in the state of Georgia? I mean, we have our own compelling interest in making sure that doesn't happen because we want to maintain our reputation in the marketplace. And our products are extremely safe. Obviously, we're not going to produce something that is going to do that. But for the state to feel that they also have an interest in consumer protection, if that is where the bar is set, then basically the bar is set pretty low and there's really nothing to stop state government from regulating every product and service sold in a state, because you can always say, well, the consumer might be harmed by something. Okay, well, let's set our laws there. So I think this is a case where no one set out to, single out our industry. Oh, we want to get these guys. I think these laws have been in place for so long, and this industry has grown up. And really started probably around the 70s is really where this came from. It became very popular. People started producing products for this particular industry. The laws were never changed. And for me, the cost is an issue. And I think we spend about $2,000 to $3,000 a year just in the state of Georgia to register our products. So you might say, well, that doesn't sound like so much. Well, yes, it's not for a company our size, and that's not the main issue. But to put it in perspective, the fees that are set are considered to be low for the industry that it is assumed is being regulated. So giant agribusiness, these guys are making tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So yeah, if they spend $3,000 a year on some tonnage fees and some in regulation, it's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. We're not making that kind of money.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to find out though is, are these federal laws, or are these just local compliance issues?
These are state laws. So it's Georgia.
They are state. Okay.
Law. Right. It's at the state level, and Georgia's not alone in that. Basically, you make the argument, well, a few $1,000s is not so much. Yes, but when you multiply that by the other 49 states in this country, which every state has their own individual set of laws that we have to follow, and sometimes they conflict with each other, and then we have to change labeling for this to comply with this, and then we find out, well, this label, it doesn't comply with this one, then we have to change this one. So it's this constant shell game that we have to play to try to get all these things in line. So
is there one law that you can point to that modifying that would change everything and fix it all, or are there multiple layers of things that need to be fixed to help?
Actually, I think in the case of the pet food, you could add some specifying language to, I guess it's OCGA 213.1, which is the definitions under the commercial feed law.
And that would fix most of what you're talking about? All of it?
For the pet food, you could carve a niche out for the type of animals that we're talking about. It says here, 18.2, specialty pet food means any commercial feed prepared and distributed for consumption by specialty pets, but not including feeds for horses, rabbits, and wild birds. Specialty pets is defined above that to mean any domesticated animal normally maintained in a cage or tank, such as but not limited to gerbils, hamsters, birds, fish, and turtles.
So can you give us some proposed language and just put that in writing so that we can follow up with that? Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any further questions? All right, and I think Representative Braddock has hit on exactly what we need in your case. And I can't understand the differential here on some old laws, and it probably is going to take an amendment to a current law or to exempt, what you're talking about. But if you'll get that language for us, we'd be glad to see what we can do to work on that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
And I believe Richard Morley. Representative Geisinger, did you want to join Richard, or? Mr. Morley, your business's traditions, if you will, let us know what that is about and how the regulations might be impacting you.
Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Morley starts, I want to thank you for doing this. It's important to our constituents who are small businesses to be able to actually come before their government and make clear to us the hurdles that they have to go over to do business in our state. And I think this is just another one of those examples that you're going to hear today.
And thank you very much for bringing this to our attention.
I'm Richard Morley. I'm a principal in Traditions in Tile. We're a small family-owned ceramic tile and stone distributor. We were founded here in Atlanta in 1936, probably the oldest independent distributor that survived this downturn in our economy. One of the things that has concerned me in the importing of ceramic tile and stone through the Georgia Port Authority, typically we've been importing since the 60s, and so we understand the rules and we know how to get our containers in and out of the port. But from time to time, a container will get held, and we understand that. But we pre-receive, pre-enter our containers. And I have an incident where on February 10 of this year, a container, we pre-entered it into the port of Savannah. It actually arrived on the 13th. It was pre-entered on the 10th. Through just the luck of the draw, our container got held for inspection, USDA, and was determined it needed to be fumigated. And we understand that. That's part of doing business. That's part of importing. But what we don't understand, and it's beginning to happen more and more, is that our container, after the fumigation process, our container just sort of disappears off the radar. This particular container was released to us on the 27th, but it was fumigated on the 21st. Our broker, Samuel Shapiro, called on the 23rd, the 24th, and finally on the 27th it was released. And along with that release came a $1,000 demurrage bill, which basically adds about 33% to the cost of moving that container into my facility. Back in 2007, I was moving a container a week, 60 plus. Today I'm moving about 30, which is half. Obviously, the construction industry is still reeling from all the challenges that we've gone through, but to expose me to possibly $30,000 more in costs that I can't pass along, I'm concerned. And so I contacted Mr. Geisinger just as a matter of, I don't know who to turn to. I don't know who's an advocate for someone like me. It's just, those are the rules. This is what you have to play by if you want to import. And I was wondering if there's any recourse. Is there anything that we have? I can go to Charleston. I can start bringing containers in there, or Jacksonville, you know, their first port of call also. But, you know, being a Georgia boy, I sort of like to support my state and have and want to continue to it. But I don't know who I can turn to. And Mr. Geisinger said, well, you know, we actually have folks that are interested in that. Don't know what you can do for me, but at least if you can hear me out, I know for a fact I'm not the only person that goes through this particular issue. So that was my first issue that I had. The second issue, if you can see in the prepared material that I gave you, it tells you a little bit about the company and what we do. But it also, on the second page, it shows you a list of the manufacturers that we represent. And over the years, our company has traditionally been a source for the professional designer, architect, general contractor. But in the 80s, we began to build and show materials to the public. And our designers work in our showrooms. Our product, ceramic tile and stone, is a very tactile product, so you need to look at it, you need to touch it, you need to feel it. And that works very well. And we've always been very proud of the manufacturers that we represent. But unfortunately, with the internet, clients can come into my establishment that I pay taxes on in a community that I support, and they can look at my product. They can tie up my degree designer for several hours. They can learn how the product can and can't be used. They can learn technical information. And then they can go home and get on the internet and buy that product at a reduced cost from a person who has no investment in Georgia, and basically puts me at a disadvantage. And so if we could just figure out a way to at least get on a level playing field with those types of predators to us in the state of Georgia, I would be greatly, greatly appreciative of that. I don't know, what can be done, but I know starting with the sales tax, they have a 6 or 7% advantage over me. And we've had instances where people have come into our showrooms and gone out and shopped and come back, and I may have a product that's, say, $5. And they say, well, I found it on the internet for $3. Well, then we ask, well, what about freight? What if there's something wrong with it? What if it's not the right shade? How do you handle those challenges? Well, I've already learned. I've looked at the product. I know what it is. I know it's the color I want. You've told me how it needs to be set, where it can go. So I've got it all sorted out. Now, if you want to meet that new price that I've determined for you, then we'll be happy to talk. Otherwise, we're going to take our business somewhere else. And in this environment that we're in today, that's very difficult for us to continue to maintain these brick and mortar structures and allow the client to come in and utilize our facility and then sort of set the price for us. And I'm not a complainer. I'm not whining. I'm just saying these are facts that I feel like we need to address. And I'm hopeful that there can be some resolution to this at some point.
And I want to thank you for putting out your problems in a very concise manner. And I understand those. I'm going to ask, does any of the committee have questions? Well, I probably do understand this one a little better myself than most, because I'm a pharmacist and we have the same problems. And what you're doing is your overhead is increasing because you are furnishing the expertise to people, and then they go back and order just a straight product over the internet. And that that is a problem. I'm not sure how we approach that. Now we have had some talk on the sales tax on the internet. E-fairness is what they're calling that. And leveling the playing field is difficult, but I'm glad to know it exists in other industries rather than the one I'm associated with, and personally I hope we can find some way to do that. The port thing, though, we may have a little bit easier situation with, because that evidently is regulations by our port authority. Is that right?
Yes,
because it doesn't exist in other ports.
Yes.
All right. I believe Representative Clark has a question.
Mr. Morley, I'd like to thank you for coming down here and speaking to our committee, and I've got to add that you have a very, very well-respected representative. As a freshman, I've been watching who gets things done around here and who's very well respected, and he is very well respected, and I've learned a lot from him. So appreciate being here. One, I want to echo what Hardin just shared, that there's a lot of talk this year about the e-fairness, and we do feel your pain. Got a lot of small businesses in my district that are echoing the same thing, and a good friend of mine had a bicycle shop, just got shut down, and after 10 years in business, just couldn't compete with the exact same thing. They come in, get fitted on the bike, and get all the help they needed, and then go off and purchase it online. And as far as the port problem, I'm not sure if I quite fully understand that. You're saying that they would flag your crate for fumigation, and then they would lose it, and then they would charge you. Is that a storage fee?
Demurrage, yeah, it's storage. Yeah, it's a.
And so you challenge that, and
we don't. Basically, you either pay the $1,000 or you don't get your container, and they'll be happy to send it back to Italy or wherever it came from. So we don't really understand the challenge that I'm facing is I don't know who to contact or how to go about saying who can be my advocate and tell me why you can't tell me where my container is for 5 days, but now all of a sudden you found it, and oh, by the way, I owe $1,000 while it sat there in the port when it was ready to be released to me on the 21st. And our broker, Susan Pepper at Samuel Shapiro Company, said that she called on the 23rd, the 24th, and the 27th, leaving voicemails after the fumigation, and none were returned. And then on the 27th, because I had samples that I had to have for a project on that container, and I kept calling every day, and finally it was like, okay, we found it, we've released it, and it's on its way to you. But you owe us $1,000 for storage. And like I say, I can understand a day of demurrage, I can understand 2 days, but you get a certain number of free days at the port to get that container in. Well, we pre-entered it 3 days before it ever docked. So, we're ahead of the game. We've been doing this for 40 years. We know how to get it done. But in this environment, I don't have the extra $1,000 to pass along. And I just feel like it's somewhat of a cavalier attitude at the Port Authority. If you want to ship it into Georgia through Savannah, these are the rules. You play by them and move on. And I understand fumigation. We try to pre-fumigate in Italy, the containers, but I don't know if they just count and go, okay, every 10th container gets pulled, we're going to look at it. Part of it is Homeland Security. We understand that. They're looking at imports. But what I don't understand is this container was fumigated and witnessed by USDA on the 21st of February, and then it disappeared. We had no contact. Nobody released it. No anything. On the 23rd, we're like, we've got a container. So Shapiro started asking. And then finally on the 27th, it shows up, and along with the bill that I have to pay. So instead of $1,800, I'm $3,300 to move this container. And moving 30 containers, I'm not going to get hit with $1,000 on every container, and I know it. But I'm not the only person that has this challenge, and I know that. But it does make me vulnerable to not the whims at the port, but to whatever that bureaucracy is that I don't understand. And I'm just looking for an advocate. Who at the port can I talk to, or who can explain to me where my container was for those 5 days and why I had to pay the storage on it. And as a consumer, I feel like I'm owed that.
Mm-hmm. Is part of that charge fumigation?
No, the fumigation is a separate $400.
So you charge for that as well.
But I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that occasionally I'm going to get fumigated, and I factor that into the cost. But I just don't factor in $1,000 storage fees because we're too efficient at what we do.
Mm-hmm.
We've done it for too long.
Yeah. Well, we'll certainly, I think the committee hears that, and we'll try to put a word in for you and look into that. I see you got a location in Sewanee. I appreciate you doing business within my district. Donnie Phillips, maybe. Do you know Donnie Phillips?
We do.
Yeah.
We do. In fact,
Good friend of mine.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. Do you know if he's having that problem as well? Is he bringing a lot in through the ports?
I don't know. Is Donnie still importing?
I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I know his business is growing, and so
I'm not
figure
sure.
he may be. I'll ask him.
Okay.
I coach his son's baseball team, so.
Yeah. But they're a customer of ours. Yeah, they're one of the people that we touch.
Okay.
So.
Probably getting through you then.
Representative Braddock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're talking about the issues with now e-fairness is one of the things that we can do to help as far as defraying and making the taxes even for people that buy online or through brick and mortar. But you were saying that your costs because you have freight on the front end, your costs are higher. But if someone's ordering online, then they would have shipping costs on the back end that you don't necessarily have. So are there other areas that you're saying are making it difficult for you to compete outside of just the tax issues and
when the client comes in and wants to renegotiate the price, these are the issues that we have to go back through with them and ask them, are there minimum quantities? What about freight? What about if something's wrong, if it's broken? So it's the process of trying to resell our job at that new price that they're determining that they are willing to pay for it. And it's difficult to be able to give technical support and have degree designers and go through these challenges and then come back and have to resell it. There's a cost assigned to every moment that you spend in front of that client.
right, and sometimes you probably don't get the opportunity to resell it. They just go and buy. So what is your solution for that, or do you have a solution to?
You're asking you.
Oh, okay. Well, we have the e-fairness thing, but outside of that, I mean, I don't know that we really have one, or that we really can, do anything to, help that situation.
I really don't think that you do have a solution for us, but the 6 or 7% is a start towards at least getting us back.
Mm-hmm.
In 2007, I employed 150 plus. Today, I have 70 plus. Still maintain most of my locations, but it's very difficult in this environment.
Mm-hmm.
And the professional builder, fortunately or unfortunately, and I listened, we had a concrete guy and we had the apartment people in here, and we're all in that sort of that same sinking ship right now. But we are seeing improvement in construction. Commercial activity is beginning to pick up. Unfortunately, multifamily is picking up, which means people are coming out of their homes and going back into apartments for whatever reason. But for us, even the 6 or 7% helps us dramatically. So if they do go out of state and prefer to buy it and run the risk of all that, at least Georgia should get the sales tax that I would be collecting for you and have been collecting since 1936.
Yeah. Okay. So that was my question: is anything outside of e-fairness that you wanted to suggest?
No, if y'all had any ideas, I was open to it.
Okay.
But Harry suggested that I at least bring this issue up and present it to you. And
Okay.
I am very appreciative of the time. I do not envy you the job that you have in trying to sort through these various issues, but they're very important to us, each and every one of us.
They are, and they are important to us because you are furnishing the employment and the tax base for the state to operate on. So we understand, that this is our problem as well as your problem, and appreciate you bringing it to us. I guess one quick thing now, if we're going to look into this, the USDA requires a fumigating, so there's nothing the Georgia port could do about that. That's
No.
all right. The only thing you're interested in the Georgia port is a storage fee for something that you actually didn't cause the storage for.
Right.
And other states evidently do not, or other ports do not, outside of Savannah, don't charge that storage fee.
No, I'm sure Charleston will charge it and Jacksonville will charge it too. I'm sure that there would
Oh,
be
okay, all right.
demurrage.
I thought I
There would be
understood.
demurrage anywhere. What I don't understand is, for the 5 days that my container was sort of off the radar, I can't get anybody to tell me where it was, what happened to it, and why. What reason do I pay this $1,000 other than those are the rules? And
Maybe we can help you find someone toward the top of the food chain at the port that can work with you on that, and certainly try to do that.
that would be wonderful.
All right, and yes.
If I may, to show you how the business community many times has to solve its own problems, Mr. Morley has listed for you many of his more prestige products. The key to it is that at their showroom, they don't tell people today who makes the product in hopes that they can't find it and they will come back and do business with it. But it's a shame that we've reached the point where we have to do that, and the state loses its 7% sales tax.
I totally agree. I believe Representative Powell, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a small businessman, I sympathize. The internet has certainly changed all the business structure, and we constantly have to keep, moving forward. For years we've been talking about internet sales for years, and quite frankly, there's not a lot can be done because interstate commerce, that's a federal issue if they want to hem that up. Let me address this other. Harry, did you get a chance? Have you written a letter to the board members of the Ports Authority asking them about their process?
No, I have not, simply because I just learned of this week.
I might make a suggestion. And I tell you, Georgia Ports Authority is sort of like the university system. It's almost like nobody really knows what to do. They're almost like in a world of their own.
An abyss.
But their board members are appointed by the governor, and I would recommend go back to old-fashioned politics, and that would be pick up the phone, Harry, and I'm sure members of this committee would be glad to join in with Harry if he needed some backup support. There's strength in numbers, and write a letter, make a phone call to those board members, let them know this problem. Common sense would tell you the Ports Authority is a multi-billion-dollar industry down there in its own right, but still the rules of doing business, and you, as you had said, you understand all the rules of ports, and that's the fumigation process on a just pick and choose basis, same as Homeland Security deals with security issues and all. But still, once that container has gone through that, if your people are ready to pick it up and you have made a good faith effort to call and contact these people, then that says that there's some kind of a glitch in their system. And those are the things that those board members need to be notified, because water runs downhill to the folks that are doing the managing. Whether that trailer, once that container was fumigated, it got shipped off to another part of the lot. They can track all these things, and they should have been able to respond to y'all. That's, we're a world-class port down there. And, so I would say go back to the old-fashioned politics. Harry, if you draft a letter, I have no doubt that every member on this committee would sign on with you and ask them to respond back on this specific case, put the dates down there that this happened and an explanation to it, asking them to respond.
All right. Thank you, Representative Powell. And, most of the work around here gets done because of the assistance we have. And she just informed me that she's going to have somebody from the port come over and talk to you after this, not to testify, but just to talk to you individually. And that may be a good start. We'll start there, and if that doesn't solve it, then we go higher up.
Well, I certainly appreciate this. I have sat on this, and my frustration with this particular incident is just it kind of boiled over in a conversation with Mr. Geisinger, and he said, you know, I have an avenue for you at least to air your grievance.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your time.
And we have one more question, I believe, Representative Braddock.
Oh, well, I just wanted to make a statement. I mean, it's great that we can put him in touch, but I think as a bigger policy issue,
Yeah.
we need to be looking at what their policies are, because typically when someone loses your stuff, they usually compensate you for it rather than charging you for it. And, I mean, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention because, I mean, there's the rule of thumb, for every one customer that complains, you've got 10 that just leave. And so if their options are to go to another port because of our overly, zealous regulations, then I think that as a policy matter, we need to be addressing that. But getting your, specific problem solved, then I think it's great that we can put you in touch with that. But I don't know how to unravel that bureaucracy either, so I'm kind of new. But I'm learning. Thanks.
It's interesting that the federal government, in this case, will fumigate stone. Well, they seem to be picking them randomly, but I thought it was interesting that they're actually fumigating stone.
Yeah.
That's all that's being shipped is stone.
That's what I was asking him. I was like, isn't that for food? I mean.
All right.
I think they probably do that. The way they do it is trucks going into Florida. If you made sure there was nothing attached to the test or anything like that.
All right. Lee is here, and we're going to go off the record and let him discuss this. But Representative Guy, thanks very much for bringing this, and Mr. Morley, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.